This episode is sponsored by Team Builder, yet another company that's doing great things for the first responder community. As a strength and conditioning coach myself who also trains tactical athletes, dissemination of wellness information is one of the biggest challenges. Now, Team Builder is the premier strength and conditioning software for tactical athletes, and there are several features that really impress me. Firstly, there is a full exercise library, so you, the personal trainer, does not have to create that within your own department. Secondly, you can send out programming, but also individualize, which I love. So you blanket program for everyone. Now you can tweak based on someone's injury, someone's need to maybe drop some body composition, rather than having to write a program for every single person on their own. Team Builder also allows you to build custom questionnaires to collate health and wellness data. It integrates with wearables. And I think one of the most important things is obviously it tracks. To me, it's imperative that we as a profession start tracking our people from day one and then over the full span of their career, therefore catching potential wellness issues and injuries before they happen. Now, if you want to try Team Builder, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a free 14-day trial to experience all of the features. And if you want to take a deeper dive into Team Builder, listen to episode 1032 with Melissa Mercado, or go to teambuilder.com. And I'll spell that to you because it's not as you'd think, teambuildr.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show 25-year U.S. Army veteran, physician's assistant, and one of the founders of Frontline Mobile Health, Mike Connor. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the military, the creation of the Physician Assistant Program for military transition, trauma medicine, working with the first responder community, fitness standards, entry requirements, blood panels, psych evaluations, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Mike Connor. Enjoy. Well, Mike, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to our mutual friend Trevor for making this connection. And secondly, to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Well, hey, thank you very much for having me. Trevor's a powerhouse and such a solid guy and vocal advocate for firefighter health and safety, and I love him to death. He's a good dude. Yeah. All those people, honestly, out there at Pflugerville are just amazing people.
Yeah, he blew me away. We came across each other after social media, but watching this lunatic doing Tough Mudders in full firefighting gear, I'm like, okay, I gotta talk to this bloke. And now he's a force of nature in a different way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then, first question: where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
So today I'm in beautiful Colorado Springs, Colorado. It's where my wife graduated from high school and where I promised her I'd get her back to after some time in Texas with me.
Well, this is an interesting, kind of side conversation because Colorado Springs is where the National Fallen Firefighter Memorial is.
It is.
So,
yep.
We're going to be talking about how to improve those odds today.
No, absolutely. I look forward to it.
All right. Well, let's start at the very beginning of your journey. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Yeah. So I am an only child. I had a very interesting childhood. I grew up in Hawaii, but I was born in the Philippines. So my dad was a Navy guy. married a Filipino gal, moved to Hawaii. And then I was raised by a single mom who was presented with a lot of challenges growing up because Hawaii is not a cheap place to live. And we lived on the bad side of the island. And people are always like, what do you mean bad side of the island? There's no such thing as a bad side of the island. So we lived on the west side. We lived in Waianae. Lately Waianae has gotten a lot of attention because of a UFC fighter named Max Holloway, who's from Waianae, Hawaii. He's done a lot of great things out there, and I love watching him grow. But it's a very rough part of the island. My mom usually worked 2 or 3 jobs, no siblings, and I got into a lot of trouble. So I got shipped out to go to live with my grandmother for a couple of years, and then came back home, and then for my senior year of high school, we moved to Las Vegas, and then I joined the military from there because, I'd screwed off so much in school and didn't really feel like I had a purpose and didn't know what I was going to do. So shipped off to the Army right after I graduated my senior year. I did a little over 4-year enlistment. Went along the way, they were like, hey, you're really smart. You should try going to college. And so I went to college. I found a passion for science and in particular medicine, wanted to go to medical school. And then my senior year of college, I was getting ready on the end of my bed, brushing my teeth, watching Matt Lauer interview somebody. And then the camera switched over to a plane flying into the World Trade Center. And when it first happened, I was just like, oh my God, what happened? And then shortly after that, the second plane came in, and I just kind of knew, and I said, okay, well, it looks like we're probably going to go to war. So I'm going to shelf some of these aspirations for further education. Came back in the military, served as an infantry officer, did a variety of jobs there through company command, deployed multiple times to combat, and yeah, and then I kind of got tired of that, and was looking back at my college, career, and just thinking to myself, like, I really wanted to go into medicine, and the Army has this amazing program. It's the Interservice Physician Assistant Program. It's affectionately called IPAP. Navy, Coast Guard, Marines, Air Force, Army, all go through the program, and you become a PA. Amazing program, incredibly hard to get into, and just some really top-notch, special operators, combat medics, infantry guys like me, Rangers, like all of these people that show an aptitude for medicine and a passion for taking care of soldiers really get into that program. And I was fortunate enough to get in. So I was able to do that. And then I started my medicine career in the military, and that brought me out to like 2018, where I took care of soldiers and aviators. And yeah, so that's kind of me in a nutshell up until retirement in 2018.
Well, let's go all the way back to early life. So firstly, I'm married to a woman who is half Filipino, so I've been exposed to that culture. So talk to me about some of the beautiful things about Filipino culture that most people aren't aware of as you were progressing through your childhood.
Man, family is so important. Family, my mom was so busy and working all the time, but she brought her sister and her mom over from the Philippines after a while. And so they stepped in, and they just like I was one of their kids, and my mom's baby sister was really only 15 years older than me. So, she wasn't much older than me, in the terms of lifespan. And, there's a lot of respect, in the culture, right? A lot of deference to age and wisdom. Sometimes not so good, but for the most part with good intentions. The food is amazing. I'm married I'm married to a gal who grew up in Colorado in the Midwest, and she's learned how to cook like chicken adobo and lumpia and pancit. She learned from my mom, and just this kind of, I didn't have a big family growing up. Now I have a big family. I've got a very large family, but it really emphasized the importance of like taking care of your family and being there for each other. And that's probably the most impressive thing I got out of growing up as a child.
I heard, God, I'm blanking on Theo Von. That's who it was. There was a clip that came across
Happy
on social
people.
media. Yeah, exactly. So what is it when you reflect about that culture that creates that? Because that's what we're missing, isn't it? It's that gratitude, it's that community. So
Yes. Yeah. My Aunt Evelyn had the best laugh and the most infectious laugh. And I'll probably share this with her daughter because when I got older and we moved to Vegas, I actually lived with Evelyn because her and her husband worked different shifts. And so I would take care of Carrie Ann, my little cousin, who was only 16 years younger than me. So it was kind of the same age gap. So it had come full circle, and I was happy to do it. And Carrie Ann's probably one of the closest, relatives that I have, that I love and adore. And I feel the same way about her that her mom felt about me.
So what is it about the culture, though, do you think that creates that happy people element? I mean, because even cruising, there's a lot of Filipino people that work on cruise lines, and
Yeah.
it's kind of sad because they're away from their family for like 8 months, but they're sending the
Eight
money back.
months. Yeah.
But
I just experienced that. We were on a cruise recently, and people look at me and I look Latino, and I talk to my babies in Tagalog all the time. I was, fortunate enough that growing up, I learned it and I spoke it, which really messes with people when I meet Filipinos and they speak and they just kind of look at me and they just kind of do a dance. Why is this Latino guy speaking to me in Tagalog? But no, yeah, I don't know what it is about the culture. I think it's just something in the DNA, man. Like there's just something about those people that they're just so happy and they're so loving and they're so generous too. Like they will just give you the shirt off of their backs. Like anytime when we first moved to Colorado Springs, we put our boys in tutoring, and like the lady at the center that was doing the tutoring, um, you know, found out I was Filipino, and we started talking, and she was like, "Oh, here, you got to contact this person. This is a restaurant, and like these people will take care of you," and all these other things. And I just absolutely loved it. It was awesome. But yeah, I don't know what it is about the people. I think it's honestly just this village kind of culture, this tribal kind of culture that we've gotten away from, especially with like these types of things. Uh, there's a great book by Sebastian Younger called Tribe. You're smiling because you've probably read it.
yeah, he's been on the show 5 times now, I think.
Oh, that's right. I
Yeah,
saw that. Yeah, I
yeah,
saw that.
he's
And
amazing.
and that, yeah, I love that book, and it tells such a beautiful picture of, and it's the same thing in the military and in the fire service, right? Like your houses are tight, right? Like, shifts are tight, right? There's always this inter-shift competition. Same thing in the military, platoon versus platoon, company versus company. A lot of that is esprit de corps and loyalty and lifting each other up. And it helps build resiliency, which he describes so beautifully in that book. So I think it really has a lot to do with that kind of that tribal or village culture that a lot of Filipinos find themselves in their families. Because Filipino families, man, like they're huge, right? Like my mom had like 7 sisters, right, or 6 sisters and a brother, and each of them have like 6 kids each, right? So we have like these massive families that are just like, a ton of landichos running around and you're south of Manila. But yeah, it's bonkers. But I do really think it boils back to that kind of that tribal or village kind of culture.
Yeah, 100%. The other thing is the aging. Like my wife is already 6 years younger than me, and she's half Filipino. So, we joke that people think that I'm some creepy old dude that got her in a catalog, and
Yeah.
it's actually the opposite. I'm the immigrant, and she got me from a catalog.
It's awesome, man. Yeah.
All right. Well, then you mentioned about your father not being in the picture.
Yeah.
So many of us have struggles in our early life, and that sends us into
Yeah.
uniform. When you reflect back now, because usually there seems to be a common denominator with when people find themselves on the good path despite some challenges when they were younger, there often
Hmm.
is a mentor or several mentors that were able to steer them the right way. When you reflect back now, were there those key figures in your kind of upbringing?
Um, Man. So yeah, there was a guy named Mike Baker that was really influential in my life. My mom was with him for a while, and they split up eventually. But he, taught me how to work on cars, taught me how to swing a hammer, taught me about discipline. He was an entrepreneur. He had a patent for a device for a Harley Davidson, so that you could check your oil without having to, like, pop the bolt off the oil pan and like check it manually. He was just always thinking and always working hard. And I always thought to myself, like, man, that guy has it together. He's getting his stuff done. He's very disciplined, worked really hard. He was an electrician. He worked in trades. And yeah, so when I think about positive male role models, he's the first person that I think about, that taught me a lot about, you know, the grind, right? Like just getting up in the morning, going, um, doing what you said you do, getting, finishing projects on time, that sort of stuff. That really impressed me as a kid growing up. And when I've had a chance to reflect on that, he has been the person that really comes to mind.
Well, going back to what you're talking about with Filipino culture, this is
Yeah,
what we're missing now, and Sebastian's book is absolutely spot on. And there's a lot of judgmental narrative when it comes to young people that aren't headed in the right direction. And so, it's these broken families. It's like, well, those children didn't get to choose the fact that their families are broken. So
yeah,
the solution is the mentors then. So for
yeah,
each one of us that are in our homes, hopefully we've been able to be good parents and good loving husbands or wives. The next step
yeah,
is to step outside your front door and be that mentor for someone else in your community, whether you're a sports coach or a firefighter or whatever it is. Fill that gap rather than standing on an ivory tower saying, well, that family's disintegrated
yeah.
and that's why that child is a problem.
Yeah, pointing fingers at problems never, like, that does nothing, right? Like it does absolutely nothing. If like, you have to get involved in these sorts of things, right? And my wife and I, we try to support in each way that we can. We've looked at, we've applied to becoming like a cadet sponsor for the Air Force Academy out here so that they have a family. We try to get involved as much as we can. Before we moved here and the company got too big, I used to coach jujitsu and judo for my last gym. Um, specifically the kids, right? Because I like, kids are so malleable and they're so impressionable. And, one of the things I would always try to work on with them is like, hey, if your parent brought you here, make sure you tell them thanks, right? Because it takes a lot of time out of their day. Um, and yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. Like, getting involved rather than pointing a finger, kind of helps us progress forward as opposed to just kind of sitting around and, like you said, sitting in an ivory tower. And it's like, well, that's why it's all messed up, right?
Exactly. Well, speaking
Yeah.
of sports, what were you playing and doing in the school ages?
Oh man. So a lot of basketball, as most Filipinos do, right? It's
Because of
so
their
counter.
height.
Like, people don't think about it, right? But like, Filipinos love to ball. And they're good, man. They've got a wicked crossover. They can shoot from the outside. They drive through the paint. So played a lot of basketball, surfed and boogie boarded a lot. And that was really it. I didn't do a lot of team sports. I remember being young and asking my mom if I could do a team sport, and it required a physical. And her biggest concern was that I would get injured and break something, and we didn't have insurance growing up. So that was always the fear. So that was it. It wasn't, to me, it wasn't a fight worth fighting. So I would just play street ball right? I'd go surf or do something like that. So yeah, those were the things that I did. Oh, I skateboarded a lot. Man, I skateboarded so much. Of course, that's like the natural thing to do when you grow up in Hawaii, right? Like you surf, you skateboard, you do all those
I
things.
don't know if skateboarding is safer than basketball, though.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, you mentioned about joining the military. You're in this medical
Mhm.
program, and then the towers hit.
Yep.
So, kind of walk me through what that looked like through your eyes, then.
Um, I had plans, I wanted to, I was looking at going to medical school, possibly doing a combined PhD program because I was enjoying research as a senior in college. I worked in a forensics lab my senior year. Throughout college, I I did a ton of odd jobs. I bartended, I waited tables. The old GI Bill was not nearly as robust as the post 9/11 GI Bill. I think it got like $250 a month. And then I took a scholarship from the university that was a campus-based ROTC scholarship. But so you still had to work and survive, right? Like it wasn't like the new GI Bill, which is fantastic, and I think it's a great program for veterans. Um, so yeah, I had all these plans, and then watching all of that happen, kind of, you go through this shock, right? You go through this really kind of helplessness, um, and then you know, as you span the emotions and you go through it, you think to yourself, okay, well, I have to contribute. I have to give back. I want to do more, and so that's kind of where I was, and that was my thought process as it happened, and then yeah, you know, um, these invisible strings just tug us to different locations as we go through the motions of our careers. And you meet people along the way and they influence your career. You meet another person, influence your career. Uh, yeah.
So, where did you find yourself deployed?
Iraq and Afghanistan. So the initial push into Iraq, hang on real quick. The initial push into Iraq for the first democratic free elections. Then, you know, deploy, refit, deploy, military schools along the way, PA school, Afghanistan. And then after Afghanistan, I honestly thought I was in the free and clear until I retired because like they were doing these redeployment cycles. And then they hit me one more time. They're like, hey, you need to go to Korea. So like I went to Korea one last time just before I retired. But yeah, just Iraq and Afghanistan, Baghdad, outside of Baghdad, nearby, and then Afghanistan at Fob Fenty on the eastern side of Afghanistan.
A kind of reoccurring theme for people that went to Iraq early was
Mm-hmm.
initially they were received really well by the locals, and it seems to be the
Yeah,
longer we stayed, the more people
it
seem to turn.
changed.
So, what was your kind of perception of that reception?
So one thing I was not mad about with regards to changes was how the living conditions improved. um, but it did take a quick change, right? Like, we went from like this big push into an insurgency, and the insurgency got really dicey, right? They weren't, quote unquote, playing by the rules anymore. This became a counterinsurgency fight as opposed to, what we had spent everything after the Gulf War was still focused on these big peer-to-peer fights, and now you're fighting this war where, you know, some dude in pajamas could come around the corner and light you up or trigger an IED, and you wouldn't even know it. So yeah, it was a big change. I think the people the people who were there that wanted to embrace the regime change really enjoyed it, and were really supportive of what we were doing as we came in. But the longer our presence lingered without, and I'm not a strategist, right? Like, so I wasn't in the rooms making these decisions, but the longer we stayed, the more we got ourselves involved, the less our presence was tolerated.
It's just, I think it's an important conversation. It's the same with COVID.
Yeah,
During the whole COVID period, everything I was putting out was how can an individual improve their own health? That's the one truth. Whether you choose to have a vaccine and your response to that immunization, whether you choose not
yeah,
to, and your natural immunity, the healthier the people, the higher the chance of a healthy outcome. And
yeah.
the end of the COVID, no one wanted to learn any lessons. They swept it under the rug and we just want to pretend it never happened, and then move on. And it's the same with war. After 20
Yeah.
years, it's important that we do have these conversations and
Oh,
hearing
yeah.
your,
Yeah.
yeah,
How do you prevent future mistakes, right? Like,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, even with Afghanistan, the number of people that said, well, we should have gone in with SFSO communities, be kind of surgical with our
yeah,
strikes, remove the key people, remove the training areas, and then get out. And the same with Iraq. Um, and so and it makes perfect sense to a complete ding dong like me that's never been in the military. That the longer you stay, the more it feels like an occupation for those people. The more
yeah,
enemies you're now creating.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you're telling them how to run their government, right? Like you're not giving them the autonomy that they want to have. You're, influencing policy and you're changing generations of learned behavior and hoping that they're just going to embrace it. So, and odds are they're not.
Yeah, well, even with Afghanistan, one thing I heard over and over again was also the tribalism. That there was a misunderstanding that it wasn't a country; it was a group of tribes that
Group of
weren't
tribes.
necessarily communicating with each other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, to a degree they do, right? But like, who's the one doing the communicating too, right? Like that's the other thing, right? It's not. People have a hard time understanding the world over there when I can walk outside and do whatever with my cell phone, right? Like I can surf Facebook, Instagram, call my cousin in Alaska and get an update, call friends in Hawaii and see how the tsunami is over there in real time. Um, but that's not accessible to everybody. We've made things so accessible in Western society that we've gotten used to receiving information at such a fast rate that we can make a little bit better or informed decisions. But over there, that tribalism, they may still be sending messages, by freaking courier, right? Or they have cell phones set up, but there's only key individuals with cell phones.
It's a question I always ask anyone who was deployed during combat, and the reason being, when you look at American media, you get a very polarized, kind of feed when it comes to war. Either the one extreme is kill them all, let God sort them out, stacking bodies. The other side is they're all baby killers, and in the middle are the men and women that we send overseas, wearing our flag on their shoulder, to protect the people that
Yeah.
they're serving. So the first is a two-part question. The first part, regardless of the politics, regardless of the information that sent you into these countries, were there moments where you realized that within those nations there were some horrific people that did need to be addressed?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No. I mean, what comes to mind was a police station bombing that, like, you know, killed dozens of innocent people that were bystanders. Um, you know, like it's your own countrymen, right? Like it's your neighborhood potentially. And you're doing things like that. And you just have to really you just really scratch your head, like what compels a person in that area to do things like that, right? Like, yeah, no, I totally agree. There were some very evil people with an agenda that had the power that did not want to lose the power, and were grasping at straws and doing things that were unconscionable just to get those things done.
What was the contrast for you between Iraq and the way that civilization was and
Mm-hmm.
Afghanistan?
Um, Man, in a lot of ways, Iraq was a lot more modern than the area of Afghanistan that we were in. You know, um, accessibility was really a big issue too. Like you don't have the terrain obstacles that you do in Iraq than you do in regions of Afghanistan. At least the area that I was in, right? Like, I mean, it wasn't, traveling through mountainsides on frickin', barely 6 feet wide trails. I mean, I would go and visit some of our medics on another fob because they were kind of isolated, and some of our people on another fob. And I would take, we shuttle aircraft over there. Like I'd just take a helicopter ride over the mountain ridge and then come back. Otherwise, it'd be a forever ride right down an area that could be potentially riddled with IEDs. But it's to me, it was the geography and probably I feel like that geography probably played a lot in terms of that tribalism that you were discussing earlier, right? Like as if it's over the mountain and this is your plot of land, probably not too worried about the other side of the mountain.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never even thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What about kindness and compassion? This is the other side that we don't hear on the media, which
Mm-hmm.
is, whether it's
Sure.
the kindness and compassion of our own military or whether it's the indigenous
Mm-hmm.
people that we're working with.
I was, I was very rarely met with people that were not kind or compassionate, giving you gifts, right? Having dinners with leaders, with very lavish like food organization, right? And yeah, I mean the people there were really kind, and that same token, like the guys that I was over there with too were just as kind too. Sharing MRE candy, sharing candies with kids, and you know like the little kids in Iraq running up to you going, Mister, chocolate, Mister, like asking you for chocolate and stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, it just became one of those things that were normal. Now, there were other times you go out on patrol and there'd be like I remember sewing up a kid who took a rock to the face, cause he's sitting in the back of his patrol vehicle, like driving down the street, and like, some little badass kid just like chucks a rock at his vehicle and like hits him in the face. And the amount of restraint required to handle that too, when you're 19 years old and you're behind a gun system, is pretty incredible. But you see both ends of the spectrum, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But I think for the most part, we saw more kindness than we did, ill intent, especially from the younger kids. Not, I, I can't say I don't know that I could say that about some of the adults that we ran into.
Yeah, it's an important perspective for people to hear, though, because again, they're painted
Yeah.
as the boogeyman, and you hear
Oh
so
yeah.
many of these stories, and these families, dad's fixing the car, and mum's, in this particular case, making dinner, and the kids are out kicking a football, and that could be England, that could be America, that
Yeah.
could be anywhere else on the
Yeah.
planet.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. Right. Like, what would happen if we were suddenly invaded and occupied?
Yeah. 100%. Well, you mentioned Korea as well. So talk to me about some of the interesting elements of the Korean culture you're exposed to and, if any, threats.
Oh yeah. Super, super friendly people, very active people. I was always impressed. So my last, I was there from 2016 to 2017. And I was with a good group of guys. I worked in the division surgeon's office, and we would hike something every weekend. And man, Koreans just have the most amazing trail management system. And you would see like people in their 70s and 80s just cruising up these massive mountains, in the middle of summer, in the middle of winter. Always friendly, always greeting you with a smile, happy to see you on the road with them. They're not big on personal space, right? So you get on a subway and like you'll be crammed like sardines. And I remember, a couple of my buddies were just like, God, they're so close. Like, it's a culture, man, right? Like this is normal for them, right? Great public transportation system, amazing food, lots of like kindness, and a lot like Filipinos. They're pretty kind and happy to engage. If you made an attempt to converse with them in Korean, they would just be over the moon. They just like, oh, you're trying, like, here, let me feed you, let me do some stuff for you. Just really, really good people, and I never had a bad experience during my time there. the entire year. Like, it was just amazing.
It sounded like the Japanese. I lived in Japan for 15 months. And yeah, if you go to
Yeah.
Tokyo or somewhere where the dudes with the white gloves are pushing you all onto the train, yeah,
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah. 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 Just
claustrophobic,
like
you're
shoving
screwed.
you into the train. Yeah. Yep.
What about the potential threat? I think this is what's so sad about Korea is, again, like
Yeah.
Germany was, you've got this country
Yeah.
that's cleaved, you've got this
DMZ.
free nation
Yeah.
in the bottom, and then these indoctrinated, brainwashing in the north, from what we understand from the messages that we're getting at least. So what
Yeah.
was the conversation about the differences and even the threats from up north?
No, they took them very seriously. It wasn't, the further north you go in Korea, the less sparse, the less populated it becomes, right? Because everybody knows that that area of, Korea is just a giant speed bump before they get to Seoul, right? If they were to ever make a very large push down, they just know that all of those areas up front, it's kind of like our forward line of defense, just becomes a speed bump for that push on the way down. So the threat's very real. They take it seriously. Um, we did exercises all the time in Korea, just to kind of prepare war game, medical readiness. Like, what was your, medical readiness was huge over there, which is, part of how I feel like what we do as an organization is different than what other organizations do, is because we just kind of understand, like, it's really important that you understand who's fit to fight, who's ready for war. Because it's not, as the saying goes, you don't get to fight the army you want, you fight the army you have. And so medical readiness is a key component up there, and played a big portion of that job.
That's an interesting aside because you mentioned, the kind of overall fitness of the nation. And when I think of a Korean, populace, I think of a pretty fit group, even, their fire service. And then you
Yeah.
contrast conversations I've had with Dan Bernstein and some of these other people about the struggle to find candidates for the military in the US. And you look at the fact that we are 70% obese or overweight as a nation. There's this kind of mythology that regardless, you're just going to dip into your gun collection and be, Billy Badass when the Ruskies come or whatever happens. But the reality
Yeah.
is the more unfit a nation, the more vulnerable they are to attacks from other nations.
Well, the what is it? The Joint Chiefs penned a paper back in, was it 2012, 2014? I can't remember when, but they identified it as a threat to national security, the growing obesity, the growing childhood obesity rate. And it's the truth. And we talked about it, at the last International Physical Employment Standards Conference we had, which was out at Oklahoma State University that I attended. It's not just a US problem. It's a problem in the UK. It's a problem in Australia. Um, you know, one of the folks talking there, Rob, had mentioned, not only is it a like obesity problem, it's really a physical fitness problem. You're getting recruits that are coming in who've never run, who've never played sport because it's not mandatory or not required. And so just moving their body is challenging, right? You have these like biomechanical disadvantages because most of their life has been sedentary.
Was that Rob Wilkins that's speaking?
Now, is Rob Orr out of Bond University?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he's yeah. Rob's a very, very prolific author. Lots of research on load carriage, and just all around great human being.
That's someone I need to get on. He wasn't he one of the first people that was kind of focusing on the whole tactical athlete concept too?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, him and Jay Dawes. Yeah, him
Yep.
and Jay Dawes are big tactical athlete guys. I've been talking with Rob a lot, and Ben Schramm and Elisa Canetti down there, and looking forward to working with them more.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk
Yeah,
transition then. Firstly, the
yeah,
PEA program, if I'm not mistaken, it's amazing how much I've learned just doing a podcast.
yeah,
Wasn't that specifically? Firstly, it was a military program that then ended up in the civilian side. But
yeah.
wasn't it also to set you guys up for transition? Have I got that right?
You're absolutely right, man. It's great that you know that. That's the history of the PA profession. Was founded by a physician who recognized you had a group of, hospital corpsmen and combat medics coming back from Vietnam who were able to like sustain combat casualties that would be beyond, definitive care, and sustain them for, in some cases days. And it was just a skill, and these guys were coming back, and there was nothing for them once they got back, right? Like once they got back, if you told somebody you were a combat medic, you couldn't even freaking get a job at a hospital, right? I was like, okay, that's nice. Cool. So he started the first PA program at Duke University, and that was the birthplace of our profession as PAs. And then, the military, obviously, they have a tendency to kind of lead the way in terms of like combat casualty care and trauma medicine and some of that stuff. So they quickly adopted that program, and that's how it came about. But you're absolutely right. It was initially started as a transition program for medical extension of services for physicians.
I actually got my degree in University of Florida, and it gave me all the prereqs for the PA program, but I didn't go ahead because I ended up having a podcast. So it took me a completely different route. If I was going to come out of the fire service, that would have what I would have done.
Yeah.
Well, then talk to me about the transition itself then. A lot of people, they struggle with that, and going back to Sebastian,
Mm-hmm.
the loss of purpose, tribe, identity,
Mm-hmm.
etc. How was your transition, and did that PA program improve that transition process?
I think it absolutely would have, right? Because otherwise I'd have been in, I probably honestly might still be in if I didn't transition to becoming a PA. Because, I was doing fairly well as an infantry officer in the Army. I held a lot of good key positions, and, but I knew I had, I was fortunate enough to have the foresight, I think, that after I wanted to get back to something I was passionate about, which is medicine and science. And then two, I don't know that I could ride a desk for the rest of my life. I say that as I spend most of my time behind a desk now. But so the transition really did help, right? Because after I got out, shortly after I got out, my business partner, offered me ownership in the company and some purpose, and also like dealing with essentially the same population of patients. Firefighters are a lot like, service members, right? They just want to do firefighter stuff, and, they just need to be cleared, and you have to talk to them a particular way. Can't bullshit them, right? Like, they know bullshit when they see it. So that's kind of a core corporate quality that we have in the organization, is like, don't bullshit your patients, right? Be honest with them. And yeah, it's just, and typically they're willing to listen and implement things. I didn't have the same experience working in civilian medicine. When I did work in civilian medicine, I would moonlight sometimes and go work urgent cares or primary cares. Spent quite a bit of time as a neurosurgical PA. And, you'd have conversations with people, and you could just tell it's like in one ear, out the other, right? But if you talk to a firefighter about improving their health, about, showing them like, hey, these are the steps you need to take, you're able to take time with them. They're a lot more open to that conversation than, the Gen Pop, I feel.
So give me the origin story of Frontline Mobile Health then.
That's a good one. So it's really weird, right? So I talked to you about these invisible strings. So they just kind of tug you into different places. So, I became a PA. After I got back from Afghanistan as a PA, I needed to do a career change. So you look for different types of job opportunities. I was interested in aviation medicine. I wanted to be a medevac PA and work in a medevac unit. And, and so I started working towards that. And I had a boss along the way who told me he was supportive, but behind my back, from one of my buddies, I found out he was kind of shutting down my opportunities. So so I was supposed to move to the unit like 6 months ahead of time, but I never did because I had this person in the way, and I probably wouldn't have met my business partner, right, if I'd have gotten there earlier. So fast forward, I finally get to the aviation unit, go to aviation medicine course. My roommate, who's supposed to be my roommate, can't get his funding memo done in time. So Russ ends up being my roommate, just by chance, and we hit it off, right? Like we get along really well. He's such a likable person, and he's so passionate about medicine, and he's just a good dude. And so I bring him into our unit, right? And one night, as he's moving to Fort Hood, getting his family settled, his wife wants to make friends, and so he has a dinner conversation with some new friends, and one of them's a battalion chief at a fire department. He's like, "Hey, what do you do?" And Russ is like, "Oh, I'm a aviation medicine PA. I work with the aviators." And he's like, "Hey, what do you do?" He's like, "I'm a battalion chief at a fire department out here, right?" And so AJ and Russ have this conversation. And AJ, Russ explains like, "Hey, so what we do is like, we just essentially clear aviators for flight, right? Like we make sure that they're healthy, they're safe, they can perform all their functions, they've got no, disease. We do a screening on them annually." And AJ's ears kind of perk up, and he says, "Hey, you ever thought about doing that for the fire service?" And Russ was like, "No, I never even considered it, right? Like I'm a flight PA. Why would I even consider that?" And then shortly after that, Russ gives me a call, and I swear it was like, he was in a panic or something. He's like, "Hey, meet me at Alamo Draft House. I got an idea for a business. I want to talk about it with you, and I'm going to need your help." So he tells me about this idea, and this is like right at the time, and I'm going to Korea for one of my terminal assignments. And I have to tell him, I say, "Hey man, I'd love to help you, but I can't because I'm going to Korea." So obviously Russ and I keep in contact throughout that time. And then I get done with the military and I retire. I'm out of the military in like July. I go on like this crazy climbing trip with a buddy of mine, and we just hang out in Colorado and Washington and British Columbia climbing. And then I finally get back to Texas, settle down, and Russ says, "Hey, why don't you come to the clinic, about that place I was telling you about so I can talk to you." So I watched him do a physical for a firefighter. We chat afterwards, and that's how I got roped in to working with Frontline, because Russ was going to go to Afghanistan in about 9 months, and I needed to run the company while he was gone. So the timing was actually perfect, right? Like, again, those invisible strings. In the meantime, like during that time, I was actually going to go work for an orthopedic company doing ortho trauma. But I decided not to, because I wanted to take a chance on Frontline, and it seemed more appealing to me, working with firefighters and chatting with people and being in the community.
What were some of the misconceptions that you had about my profession that were kind of myth busted when you started seeing the people walk through the door?
Y'all are healthy. Probably.
We look great on
Probably
calendars.
the first one, right? Probably the first one, because the first thing people think about whenever you say you're a firefighter is those damn calendars, right?
Exactly, six-pack.
Yeah, those damn calendars. And no, you couldn't be further from the truth in some cases, right? Like there's some pretty unhealthy people. So that was probably the first one. The second one is that, you guys are fighting a fire every day. And it's like hard ass work, hustling all the time. And I'm not saying that you don't, right? Like I don't want people in the audience to just like send me hate mail or anything like that. I'm just saying that like you go through these undulating phases. And I think that's where health really plays a important role in physical and mental resiliency. Because when you hit those high points of operational tempo, you have to have the physiologic reserve to manage those high points. And the only way to do that is by staying healthy, right? So that was number one, healthy. Number two, like you guys were always hustling and like, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And then number three, I think the biggest one was all you do is fight fires, right? Fight fires and like take care of the motor vehicle accident stuff. Like the amount of ridiculous stories I've heard from firefighters for calls that they go on has, yeah, mind-boggling, right? Like the utilization of EMS services is almost like pitiful in terms of like what firefighters get called out to do sometimes. And I feel bad for y'all for that.
One of my funniest slash most frustrating calls I ever ran on, and there was a slight psych element to this, but it was one of our frequent
Yeah,
flyers, and he called because he just got new dentures and he didn't like the taste of them. And then he starts being
yeah,
belligerent. So not only do I have to take him to the hospital because he requested to go to the hospital, I have to take a
yeah,
rider. So another firefighter, he
yeah,
was a big lad, because if he
yeah,
loses his shit, then we gotta, tie him down and drug him.
yeah. Restraint.
So,
Yeah, you got to do restraints, right? Hit him with a B-52, something.
exactly, exactly. So
Yeah.
the magic cocktail. Yeah. So, well, then what about as far as you started talking to them, understanding the kind of work week, the shift cycle, the magnitude of what
Oh
they're
man.
working versus, again, the all they do is sit
Yeah.
around and, smoke cigarettes and play cards.
Yeah. So that's probably the thing that I've noticed across, taking care of firefighters in multiple states is that, man, y'all, you don't have, so, okay, let me break this down. So number one, the schedules are crazy to me, right? West Coast schedule, Kelly schedules, 24/48, 48/96s, modified Kelly, whatever you want to call it. It does not, long term, there's consequence, right? There is consequence to these things. And when you're young and you're physically resilient because you have great physiologic reserve, you're probably going to handle it fine, right? But, it's like radiation, right? Like it's not the first dose, it's the accumulation of doses over time that start to really break people down, and where their health really starts to fall apart, right? And we see it, right? There's tons of literature out there that talk about cardiovascular disease and cancer rates in public safety, and I think the shift thing is really a big component of it. And I don't have a good answer for it. You can talk about 24/72s, right? That might be a healthier option for people. But I think that's also kind of situationally dependent too, right? We've got a paper brewing right now, looking at 24/48 transitioning to a 48/96. And, for this particular department, it improved their systolic blood pressure whenever we looked at the analysis, and it didn't really affect anything else. And they had some mild improvements in their sleep, but it's a small department, right? So single station department, and their average overnight call rate is 0.9, so that's not bad, right? Like that's not going to work for a large metro department who's getting called out twice in the middle of the night. Um,
Twice. That's a
that
good
might be,
shift.
yeah, yeah,
That's a
yeah.
great shift.
So, but you get my point, right? Like I think sleep is the slow ticking time bomb, that impacts a number of things, and then the environment, right? Like, because if you get into an environment where like, hey, we're going to go to Whataburger for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, um, probably not a good idea. If you get in an environment where like fitness isn't a priority, and that's where policy kind of comes into place, right? Where fitness isn't a priority, it's just gonna keep chopping legs out from underneath you in terms of building some physiologic resiliency.
Yeah, I mean the one study, I don't know if it was the Joel Billings study that you're talking about, or if you're doing your own, but the what they found with the 48/96, what Joel found, the same exact thing.
Mhm.
It's tiny department, less than one call a night, so basically zero
Yeah,
a lot of times.
yeah,
And the actual benefits were that second 24 or the 48, and where they were comparing it is because when you got up to go to work, you were sleep deprived because you're getting up at 5 a.m. like a lot of us do to get to the station on time because we don't live anywhere
yeah,
near where we work, because we can't afford it.
yeah,
So that is mitigated for free by changing the start time. Because if you do a
Yeah,
24-hour shift,
I've talked about this before. Why don't you start in the evenings?
well, not even
Why
the
don't you
evening.
shift?
Think about this: midday.
Yeah. I mean, any point where you can complete like, the requisite sleep cycles and get your requisite rest, you know, I've always thought to myself like midday or afternoons are great because like you come in, right? You do your checks, you do your shift change, and then you go to bed, right? Like you go to bed if you ever sleep cycle over and then you get off shift, you get home, you're able to be with your family for dinner and those things, those types of things make the most sense to me. Just altering the time at which you do your shift change
Mm-hmm.
would be great.
Agree.
So I know some departments that we've worked with have recently changed that, and by some I mean like a very small percentage, because they have kind of noticed that and they've listened. But those it's little things like that that can improve. I feel like the overall health
Mm-hmm.
of organizations.
Yeah, I mean if you did it at 11 a.m., 12, because I don't know if other people listening have the same. If I've got to work in the evening, I can't relax that day because I know I'm going
Yeah.
to go to work. So,
Yeah.
but you miss rush hour. You actually get to wake
Mhm.
up, with your family, have breakfast, take your kids to school,
Yeah.
whatever, and then you go to work. And then if you're off
Yeah.
going, you don't have to wake up at 7 a.m. for shift change. You can sleep. If you had 3 or
Yeah.
4 calls at night, sleep till 10. Everything's checked out.
Yeah.
If you don't get a call, now you don't end up being a smear on the side of the freeway when you're trying to drive home and you end up wrecking your car. So
Yeah.
it's a win-win. And then with the 24/72, it really boils down to, a lot of departments do run. So that right hands down is the best one. The quiet ones, it's like, military members in, a hospital clinic. No one's complaining
Yeah.
that they're not taking grenades and RPGs at
Yeah.
work. That's what
Yeah.
happens. So,
Yeah.
but each of them deserves to be at home with their family the same amount of time. So even if you are a
Yeah.
quiet department, why does the banker go home after 40 hours and the firefighter has to work 56? So I think that's the answer. If you're quiet, awesome. Then you'll be training more and you'll be holding that fitness standard. But I
Yeah.
think that one of the biggest mistakes we make in the fire service is we hold the number of calls that we went to as a metric of our our worth, when if you're quiet, then you're offsetting that with training to be prepared. Because, for example, how many of those horrific school shootings happened in very, very sleepy small towns?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, those are great statements. And I totally agree. You just have to, it's you're having to change a lot of, what I call like generational dogma, right? Like they're just this thought in place that like, no, we can't do this, we can't do that because this is going to happen. It's like, well, now we're in this big age of collecting data, right? Like, well, let's collect the data, right? Run a trial run, right? Like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Run a trial run and see how your members feel, see how, things shake out after that. The problem is always funding, but there are sources for grants. There are sources out there that just take some work to get to, that you can do those types of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting with most departments is because we're in a recruitment crisis, the money's already there, but it's downstream. It's the overtime. It's the
Yeah.
lack of retention. It's the workman comp claims. It's the,
Yeah.
the lawsuits when we
Yeah.
make mistakes. So
Yeah.
it's a short-sighted fiscal,
Yeah. And
perspective.
how do you mitigate that, right? Like it's this vicious cycle, really, right? Like you talked about it, right? It's the overtime, it's the workman's comp, right? Well, why is overtime and workman's comp happening? It's because you have an unhealthy force that's getting injured, that's probably tired. But if you implement some of these changes ahead of time, that stuff starts to trickle back into the budget, right? Like you have fewer days off because of workman's comp, right? Like, annual health and wellness screenings, right? The biggest obstacle to all of this is funding some of those things. But when you're able to paint a clear picture to the risk management people, because those are really ones that are holding the purse strings, right? It's all the risk management people. Whenever you're really able to like paint this clear picture of like, hey, this is how we can reduce our time, right? Like people also talk about like embedded strength and conditioning specialists for departments, like, man, those are worthwhile investments that pay big dollars in the long term. When you look at large organizations that are spending millions of dollars on work comp and staffing, man, those millions of dollars can be used in other areas. Just allocate a little bit of that and just bet on the program and run it, and then do an analysis afterwards and be able to prepare that data for risk management, city council, so those things can get approved. It's like, hey, look, this is how many work days we saved compared to last year because we implemented this program. And then, when it's black and white like that, when it's objective information, it's hard to refute, right? When it's a gut feeling, people will poo-poo the idea all day long.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I was just talking to this with a guest yesterday about this. There was a news article recently, and it was, multiple agencies have reported on this. The LAFD, over 3 years, their overtime budget, this is fire specifically, overtime budget was $1 billion with a B over 3 years. So when you look at the recruitment crisis, there's a reason why young people aren't becoming firefighters anymore. And it's what we're talking about. These young people have access to all things health, all things mental health. They understand the importance of relationships, being home. So when you start addressing that, because it's only 10 years ago where we were testing against thousands and thousands of people for 10, 20, in my case, it was 30 jobs, 1,000 people at the written test for 30 jobs. So it's not like, it's recent that we had that kind of demand. We've just screwed, by not changing everything, with this information age exploding. And it was interesting because I just did an AI search the other day on the 2472. And for the first time, AI starts talking about all the health benefits, all the financial benefits. Yeah. So this is what, and if you Google, is it healthy to be a firefighter? Everything that comes up is all the things that we die from. Yeah. So, and you talk about data, I mean, just look at any firefighter's Facebook or Instagram feed. It's nothing but black bands on, Florian. So, there's such a beautiful opportunity to turn it around. And most agencies, the money is already there, but it's downstream. And what baffles me is why those financial gurus in cities and counties aren't the ones coming to the fire departments and saying, what is going on with this overtime? There must be a better way of doing this, but it's the
You're just cutting checks. There's happily cutting checks, right? Like, and I think one of the proposed changes that was discussed at IPES, the International Physical Employment, so I'll just call it IPES from now on. That we had like these group conversations, like, hey, how do you fix this recruitment for the tactical athlete population, for the military, for the fire service, for police? And like, the smartest idea I heard that came out is that, like, you need to have a pre-academy academy. Like, you need to have a conditioning phase before they get there, right? Like, you need to show them how to move their bodies, how to lift properly, shed some pounds, right? To get them to be capable of joining. Culturally, we probably just need to encourage our children to move more. Like, my boys, my kids, they can't be in the house all day. Like, I'm kicking them out. Hey, go get on your bike, go to the store, like, go fishing at the lake down the road, get outside, get some sun, keep your phone on you. So, like, I know I can get a hold of you if I need to get a hold of you. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, that's just something that for some reason we've just kind of gotten away from. And we need more of it. Like, they need to run, they need to play. And then that slowly starts to mitigate these issues that we're having in recruitment, right? It's just that you have to introduce it now to this generation so that in, the next generation isn't struggling through it again. Because we've sort of created a mess in terms of the recruitment pool at the moment by not focusing on these things that, guys from, I hate sounding like a crabby old fart, but like, back in our day, right? Like, drinking from the hose and running around the neighborhood and, staying out till the, street lights came on was totally a normal thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, watching my son, he ran cross country, then he ran track. He did JROTC. Like, there are some phenomenal young people that would be incredible firefighters, police officers. And I've talked about this several times on here. I think it was the Wall Street Journal did a piece on how Gen Z is going into the trades, because the same way they're learning about how shit it is to be a firefighter at the moment, not the job, the working environment. I adore the profession. It's the same with university. They're like, wait a second, $60,000 in debt for a piece of paper that doesn't guarantee me a job. That's ridiculous. I'm going to go learn to be a welder, or I'm going to go to PA school, or whatever it is. So that's fantastic. They're there. You know, a lot of them are in good shape. There are great mentorship programs. The one locally here for firefighters, where you do take
Yeah.
a diverse population and challenge them to reach the bar to be a firefighter. But yeah, so the they are out there, but we have to show them as employers, as firefighters,
Yes.
that we will take
Yeah.
care of you. If you're going to leave your family for 24 hours at a time and possibly die, that we're at least going to give you an environment that sets you up for success and hopefully a long retirement.
Yeah, the Explorers program is such a great program for, budding firefighters for high schools and stuff. And I think that's such a great thing that you can really kind of open someone's eyes to. Yeah, but yeah, and then, I think what we also need to do too is we probably need to just um, take care of firefighters better, and screen heavily and work hard on just making that making it normal, right? Like normalizing it, right? Like, hey, after checks are complete, like we're all gonna do PT together as a crew, and that because that's what our schedule says, right? Like that's what our policy says. Those types of things need to be kind of normalized. I know lots of organizations where that is normalized, and I know lots of organizations where it's not. Um, yeah.
Were you surprised when you started diving in a little deeper that a profession where lives are at stake, where we carry a lot of gear and at sometimes have to perform at a very high level of exertion, that there are no fitness standards in this profession?
Yeah. I was so there's WFI, which has some of these things. What I was really surprised was how policy was just kind of all over the place, in terms of like fitness testing, occupational performance testing, medical testing. There's a big guideline, right? So like 1580 recently took like WFI and 1582 and kind of mashed it all together, and hey, this is your guide, you can use this, but organizations need to have these policies to themselves, right? You just can't point back at the book and then not know what the book says. Like you have to have your own way of like normalizing it and having culture. I think I was more surprised by how, like, one organization in particular that we work with, like they've got like pack walk, they've got like occupational consumption testing, they've got a physical fitness test, and they've got a medical test. And that's great, right? And they've got a policy that says on shift, you're going to do PT for an hour, right? And then you go to another organization, it's like, we do medical physicals, and that's it, right? Doesn't tell you anything else. So once a year, you might like crash diet and, freaking work out a ton just before your physical, so you can pass, as opposed to just normalizing the standard. And this is, part of where I think that the fire service could, maybe look to the military for some guidance on some of these things, right? Like we had MOS tasks that we had to complete on an annual basis, right? Ranges, had to shoot your weapon, had to operate those things, right? You had occupational testing. You had a physical fitness test that you had to pass twice a year. And then you had a medical annual physical exam that you had to do, depending on the community that you worked in, at least once a year. And if you wanted to go to a special school like dive or smoke jumping or whatever, right? Like you had to pass an additional physical, right? It was a special skills physical. And that you just don't see that in the fire service. In a lot of institutions, it's just kind of all over the place. And I'm not saying it needs to all be the same. I'm just saying it needs to be captured and consistent.
Well, I think we have an opportunity to all be the same. The reason I say that, unlike, for example, even law enforcement, when you talk about, what would a physical fitness standard look like? And I'm talking about the occupational tasks part of this.
Yeah.
I mean, the CPAT, the fire sled version of the CPAT, the FPAT, I think they call it, when you're moving hoses and ladders and dummies that are equivalent of a human being and climbing stairs with load, no one can say that's not fair. Doesn't matter if male,
No,
female, gay,
absolutely.
18,
Yeah. The
55.
Canadian was, it's like, it's the Canadian Physical Assessment Test, I think is what it's called. That's what Pflugerville uses. And it's a great test, right? Because you're moving a ladder, you're simulating a breach, You're dragging a rescue randy, you're dragging a charge line, you're moving up and down a ladder. So you're hitting all of these things that are occupationally uniform, right? And it's one of those things where you can just say without a doubt that like, hey, if I can do these things and this person can do these things with under these time constraints, then I can trust them to get the job done, right? Like there's no doubt as to the capability of that person.
Yeah. And where I get, not pushback so much because I don't, ask people in the first place.
Yeah.
It's a non-conversational topic in my opinion, but where the water gets muddy is when people go, well, we'll do a max vert test and a max deadlift, and they start
Yeah.
inventing these things like, no. Because if you just
Yeah.
go to the tools that we just talked about, that's exactly what you were required to do in Fire Academy. So then any of
Yeah.
this, oh, it's not fair, you're trying to take our jobs bullshit. It's like, well, no, because at the front door, you knew
Yeah. This is
exactly what is
completely
expected
applicable.
of you. Yeah. So I don't
Yeah.
want to hear it. If you don't want to do this anymore, that's absolutely fine. Go to fire prevention, go check extinguishers, but you have no business being on a fire engine anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do think, pre-academy, there are certain tests, and I do think it's interesting to understand, just from a research and probably like a just kind of put it to bed understanding, like what are the physiologic characteristics of someone who will be physically and mentally resilient through academy training and then throughout a career in the fire service, right? Like, what does body fat look like? What does skeletal muscle mass look like? What does VO2, like absolute or relative, look like? Um, maybe throw in a grit questionnaire like they did at West Point, and what does that look like in terms of, how can you assess and identify who's going to be the injury risk that isn't going to make it through academy, right? And that's kind of like some stuff I'm working on in the background with a couple of labs at Oklahoma State, and I've talked to Mark Abel at UK about this. It'd be nice to know because these tests are relatively quick and simple, right? Like an IMTP is you just freaking yank on a bar for as hard as you can for a few seconds to generate power, and depending upon where you land on the scale, like where is that number that shows that like, hey, you're going to be an injury risk and you need special attention before you start the academy, right? Like these are things that you need to work on, and that could help out with this problem that we've got right now with recruitment, because it's not just recruitment, because when you end up recruiting somebody, what's the fallout rate for the people that have poor physiologic characteristics, but they're still meeting the minimum standard on the 1.5 mile run, the other stuff, or the CPAT even, right? And that's some stuff that we're gathering data on the background with some of our larger organizations and some of our more historic organizations in Central Texas.
I think this, and we talked about this, I think, when we spoke a few weeks ago, but this is the other
Mm-hmm.
portion of this recruitment demand issue that we have at the moment. When this is
Mm-hmm.
fixed, and this is happening in Florida, the departments that have gone to the 24/72, literally their HR phones are ringing off the hooks now, people wanting to work for them. So now you've got that large list, and arguably now you start selecting the
You can
self-starters.
select, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like you have an OML now, right? Like, hey, you did well on this test and you're physically fit and like you've got great job history and no criminal record. Hey, you're the top of our OML.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially recruitment, right? It's like, it's like the combine, right? Like, you just, you pick your workhorses and you pick your race horses and then you go.
Exactly. Yeah. But if you're, scraping the bottom of the barrel, then you're taking almost everyone. Then now the chances of injuries down the road, and then again, no disrespect to the people that are prone to injury, but for, when I was testing, I was working an office job while I was going to the fire academy. I was working out on my lunch hours. I was running in the evenings. I was, doing all the things because it was very, very competitive. So I, made sure I was physically resilient when I entered the academy. Now you take away that demand where they're going into high schools and begging them to let them go send them to the fire academy. as you
Yeah.
mentioned, with this young group, you're going to have the athletes who are going to do incredibly well, but you're going to have the kids
Yeah.
that have been playing Xbox for the last 10 years. And what are the chances of them, having strains, sprains, etc.? So even in
Yeah.
this, the higher we set the bar for recruitment, the more chance there is of that group of people that you have being the right kind of physical candidate. So the chance of injury is much lower.
Yeah, and really it's about like not just like making sure they get through the academy fine, but also like how they thrive throughout their career, right? And then there's maintenance, right? Like there's quite a degree of maintenance that needs to occur if you're going to be on the job, right? So you have to, I affectionately call it chopping wood and carrying water, right? Like you just have to chop wood and carry water. It's part of the job. It was that way in the military, and it's that way in the fire service and any other really public safety position.
So let's kind of go into, all the different elements that you offer at Frontline Mobile Health.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we like to distinguish ourselves because we have kind of listened to our fire chiefs. That was probably the first thing that we did was like, hey, what do you need, right? And they threw us a copy of 1582. It was 1582 at the time. And it was funny because 1582 reads just like a military manual for performing annual exams for service members. So it was easy to read, easy to pick up. Where we saw where it fell kind of short, and we knew that there was a need was this particular iteration kind of lightly touched on behavioral health stuff and lightly touched on cancer screening. And then the cardiovascular testing was really considering the risk, right? Like, so I ran the numbers for a paper that we're pushing through right now. I looked at the U.S. Fire Administrator's website of the line of duty deaths collected from 91 to 2021. And when you look at the number of people who have succumbed on duty or considered a line of duty death from cardiovascular event, over 98% of them were over the age of 30, right? And the old standard, which I thought was actually okay, had cutoff points of 8, 10, and 12 METs, right? VO2 wise, that's like 32, 35, and 42 METs in terms of your cutoffs for being cleared for duty. And the recent iteration, this is kind of going into our cardiovascular screening, why I'm talking about it. Now it's a lot easier for you to pass as an older guy than it is for you to pass as a younger guy, which is kind of opposite because age is really the biggest risk factor. So we do a lot of cardiovascular screening. We do that through advanced labs like LP(a), ApoB. It's not something that you would typically get at your primary care in an annual physical. And we do that because we know that those identify genetic risk, and those are the real numbers that allow you to understand, what your cardiovascular risk is. And then we do something called a cardiopulmonary exercise test, which is where we hook you up to a mask and we're directly measuring your VO2. We're looking at your heart rate. We're looking at your ECG tracings as you go through. So we're just making sure that, when we redline the engine in a controlled environment, that we don't see anything that's going to concern us, right? Because where you want to redline the engine is in a controlled environment and observe it. You don't want to redline the engine on scene and have a mayday. So that's kind of how we run the cardiovascular stuff. Cancer screening, we do solid organ ultrasounds from the neck all the way down to the scrotum, and just looking for, things that aren't supposed to be there. We offer, we're looking at, kidney function labs, liver function labs, PSAs, stuff that you wouldn't normally order in someone in their 20s and 30s. But because of, the occupational exposure risk over time just kind of predisposes you to having a higher hazard ratio in terms of like developing cancer in the profession. And then behavioral health, right? Like we generationally, you and I come from the same timeline, right? Like, put it in a box and shove it in the back, right? Is kind of what we've been told for most of our careers. And, again, it's like radiation, right? It's not the first dose, it's the accumulation of doses that slowly erode and chip away. So we focus on a lot of screening tool questionnaires that, you probably wouldn't get if you go to your annual health and wellness physical, right? Like they're not going to ask you about PTSD. They're not going to ask you about your sleep quality unless you have a particular complaint about your sleep. But we ask all of them: sleep, anxiety, depression, PTS, um, burnout, compassion fatigue, secondary stress, some of the things that really affect the profession that people don't really talk about. Our big one is sleep. We talk a lot about sleep hygiene, especially off shift. Sleep hygiene off shift is like so important. And we've got, I feel like the fire service has some bad habits, but that's just part of coping, right? Like when you work a 24/48 or a 48/96 or a Kelly shift, those are the things that you have to do to kind of get you that second bump for the afternoon. And then the next day, you're habituated by it, right? So you just kind of continue that product. So we do a lot of that screening. And then we spend quite a bit of time with our patients. We don't, it's not like an urgent care visit where the doc just kind of pokes his head around the corner and gives you like 5 minutes to talk to him and asks you if you're still at the pharmacy around the corner from your house, and he leaves and then you never see him again for another year. Like we try to spend a lot of quality time with the patients. Each patient's allotted like 45 minutes because there's a lot to cover with what we do, and we want to be able to give our patients an opportunity to talk about it. And then at the end of it all, we summarize all of it, we de-identify all of it, and then we share it with the fire chiefs because that's their ammunition to go back to the city for continued funding or nutrition classes or perhaps some resiliency classes or some equipment for their stations. And so that's kind of our big thing is that we share all of our data. It's the department's data, and we want to make sure that they get it in a timely manner. And then they're able to have these conversations with, districts or cities in terms of funding.
What about the information you were talking about? Everything from the sleep disruption to the compassion fatigue to the depression, PTS, etc. What is happening with that data?
So can you clarify, like, what's happening?
Is the organization responding to that? Is there a treatment plan based on how they report?
Oh yeah, we give it to them so that they can use it to, we've got one department that shares it with their organizational psychologist that offers classes and treatment. Some of them use it to bring in resiliency specialists or partner with resiliency teams that, they have these types of things available to them. Some of them, I can't remember which department it was, but one department in particular, whenever we started seeing all these sleep scores, people were complaining about beds. And so we told the department, and so the department bought new beds. And so like, it's stuff like that allows us to kind of give feedback to department leadership. Because, I don't feel like, the people in the ivory tower are there to, make shit up so that they can make their members miserable. They genuinely want to care for their members in most cases. And they just, lack the awareness. They're not getting this feedback that allows them to have the understanding of what's going on at the at the small unit level, really, right? But the more that they have this understanding, the better, right?
It's been interesting kind of listening to all the different departments and all the pushback, when it comes to changing the work week, for example. One of the departments I worked for was a 56 no Kelly 24/48. They brought in, and I'm sure it was probably volunteered by some university, but they did a sleep study. And, the outcome was, your firefighters are chronically sleep deprived. That was it, the end. All right, thanks, bye. And what's crazy, so they got data, I did nothing with it. And what's crazy is if you look at the firefighter cancer conversation, they'll talk about the carcinogens in our gear, which, as you mentioned, we don't go to fires all the time. At least I don't work now, but even in my career, I watched it start to decline over the years. But there's no conversation about sleep deprivation, and shift work is a known carcinogen. When you look at the mental health conversation, they'll talk about peer support teams and, it's what James saw with that decapitated 3-year-old, but they won't look at the sleep, the work week, when that's a direct correlation to all things mental ill health, to the point where, if you're going to SF selection, they're going to deliberately sleep deprive you for a few days to try
Yeah,
and get you
that's
to tap out.
part of your, yeah, that's part of the job, right?
So
Like you go to see her, that's part of it, right? Yeah.
exactly. So this is where I get frustrated, and it's happening now. This revolution has taken off. So fire service, brace yourself, because if you don't want to change your work week, it's going to happen to all the departments around you, and you're going to have to change anyway if you want to hire anyone. But
Yeah, yeah. Top three behavioral health issues that we see in our practice: sleep, number one, and then compassion, fatigue, and burnout.
yeah, exactly. So if you're buying new beds, that's awesome. But, again, is
Yeah,
that really fixing the solution? Or, oh, I don't know,
yeah,
maybe they need more sleep. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
this is what's exciting, because all these metrics then are going to improve. And then you add these other layers to it.
yeah.
Imagine if you got a well-rested responder who then goes to a counselor.
Yeah, we have found that if you have a clinically significant impairment in sleep, you are greater than 50% more likely to have an impairment in some other aspect of your behavioral health.
Yeah. And then testosterone, another huge metric. How many young
Oh, yeah.
firefighters do you come
Yeah.
across who should be in the 800s and they're in the 200s?
Holy dude, it is bonkers, man. And well, the amount of testosterone use in the fire service is crazy, but like, I mean, when is testosterone made, right? It's made when you sleep,
Exactly.
right? So yeah, of course, people are going to be low because their sleep's terrible and they're going to be supplementing. And the hard part about supplementing, and this is where I'm going to get on my soapbox, is that like, the TRT in some cases really isn't TRT, it's TR optimization. And it's a billion-dollar industry, and it does come with risk, right? So we need to be aware of that, especially if you're a firefighter. It does come with a lot of risk, and you need to be managed tightly. You need to be managed so tightly, right? And that requires you to take ownership of your health.
Absolutely. There's a company that I love, veteran-owned company. They've got a full nonprofit arm called Transcend, and
Mm-hmm.
because this is an issue I've had. When you listen to Kirk Parsley talking about sleep 10 years ago, Navy SEAL
Mm-hmm.
turned physician, he was on the show. He told this story. The original scale. You and I would go into the doctor, and it'd be like, well,
Yeah,
Mike, your T is 300. You're fine, because the range is
yeah.
250 to 950. Well, that
No, it's
was
not.
an Ivy League
Yeah.
school study where the 250 was an 80-year-old that lived in his recliner, and the 950
Mm-hmm.
was the high school athlete. So then
Yeah.
the pendulum swung all the way the other way, where now these men's clinics popped up. And yeah, I've got lots of young firefighter friends that are on TRT, and they were not told about the infertility, the hair loss,
Yeah.
the bitch tits, all the other things, the back knee.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
all the stuff that comes with it, right? Like,
hmm
there's a lot that come. I mean, never mind that like mismanagement can cause you to have like, a higher blood count. That higher blood count predisposes you to dehydrating a lot faster, right? And what do you do as a profession? You put on a shitload of gear and you go into a hot building. Excuse me. So yeah, there's just you have to be aware of some of these things, and it with trepidation, you should do it, right?
yeah,
Try to fix as much as you can before you decide to rely on it.
exactly. So yeah, one more 24-hour period between shifts to sleep is a huge one.
Oh
Exercise,
yeah.
nutrition, but then peptides. There's a few that stimulate your body to make a little bit more of its own testosterone. I have done
Yeah.
that one. At the end of my career, when I just was like 14 years of not sleeping, it had to have taken a toll. So I did peptides for about a year, and then came
Hmm.
off. And it wasn't a huge gain by any means, but it was like about 10, 12 pounds on. I would
Yeah.
arguably underweight when I was working, and it sustained and it stayed on, and everything's good and libido's good. So that's that
Yeah.
other middle piece, is if you are working shifts and you just can't quite get the holistic approach to get everything completely in line with a company like Transcend. This isn't a sales pitch, I just truly trust them.
Sure.
You can use
Yeah.
peptides just to tweak your body a little bit. That's very different than exogenous testosterone with TRT.
Yeah.
So great tool as well. Well, you mentioned VO2 max. Let's go back to aerobic
Yeah.
capacity, the
Sure.
decline of the standards, and how that
Yeah.
applies to our readiness to perform on a worst case scenario on a call.
Yeah. So old 1580. So this is my soapbox, right? Like you're going to hear me say this over and over again. One job, one standard, right? Like we know that certain tasks, right, thanks to people like Mark Abel, Emily Langford, some of the smart folks that have done a lot of aerobic capacity research with firefighters specifically, we know that, some of these tasks require a MET level in the range of 9 to 11, right? Victim rescue, hose drag, bundle carries upstairs, that kind of stuff. And so the 8, 10, and 12 standard was really good, right? It was uniform. It didn't matter if you're male, female, didn't matter if like whatever, right? This was the standard, period. And then in late 2023, the new standard became, hey, we're going to follow the ACSM guidelines, which acknowledge that as you get older, your VO2 changes. Females inherently have a lower VO2 than males. And so we started watching this and paying attention to it. Really, Alex did, our lead ex-phys. And and then he shared this with me one day, and we looked at the percentage of passes on the old standard by decade of age compared to the new standard, right? So the percentage of passing in the old standard, which is that 8, 10, and 12, was higher in the younger groups in the 20s and 30s, and it would start to taper off, right? Because as you got older, and it's not just a matter of like as you get older, your VO2 decreases. As you get older and you've been in the fire service for a decade or two, you've probably gotten out of shape, right? So some of these bad habits have accumulated. And then we used the same amount of data, and we looked at the pass rates by decade of age starting in the 20s, according to the new ACSM standard. And, it was staggering, right? So if you were in your 20s, you had a very significant fail rate. But the minute you became 30, your pass rate went way up, right? And then same thing for 40s, 50s, and 60s in our data. 6,000 tests, right? When we analyzed and we compared, 6,000 tests, when we compared 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds to 20-year-olds, if you were 30, you were 27 times more likely, not 2.7 times, 27 times more likely to pass your aerobic capacity standard test than you were if you're in your 20s. If you're in your 40s and beyond, it got anywhere between 32 to 37 times more likely, right? So what is the translation? What does that mean? Well, it means that medically and, according to the WFI standard, which is the aerobic capacity standard, if you're older, you're going to have an easier time to pass your test, right? Because your standard's lower. If you just look at going from like 20s to 30s, it's, if it's on a treadmill for aerobic capacity testing, it's like 20%. If it's on a cycle ergometer, it's like 30%. Just more likely difference, right? And you don't drop that much in that decade of age, right? And then you have to like bring into question, like, what do you tell somebody who's 29, who's taking his test, that next year he's going to be like 27 times more likely to pass his test, right? So it really was just staggering. And it's in review right now. The paper is going to come out. It's in review right now, but it really just kind of goes to show you that I think the intention was good, right? Like the intention was that, hey, we have a lot of institutional knowledge. We're trying to make sure that, we don't lose this institutional knowledge. And so we're going to, make sure that the guys who were failing before are able to continue in the profession. But what you've done, right? What you've done is, the greatest risk, the greatest risk that is, outside of our control for cardiovascular disease is age, right? But what you've done is you've made it easier for people who have been on the job for decades to pass that test compared to someone who's in their 20s. And it doesn't make sense, right? Because like the people with the greatest risk, right? That example I cited earlier, right? 98% of the firefighter fatalities occurred over the age of 30, right? Over a 30-year period. Those are the people who have the easiest time to pass now. Those are the people who are going to be probably working a lot harder than the younger person with a lot more physiologic reserve. So it was really kind of shocking and eye-opening, and we just decided that we're just going to release it in a peer-reviewed paper so that we can kind of bring it to light and hopefully stimulate some change, right? Like, hey, this was a great idea, but like you need to understand the impact and the risk that it's going to have on people, right? Like, you know, in our conversation a few weeks ago, you kind of made the comment, and I've recycled it. You know, when you go out on a fire ground and you see someone working a fire, and they're in their bunker gear and their SCBA on and their helmets on, like, I can't tell if that's a 50-year-old guy or a 20-year-old gal or a 30-year-old dude, right? None of that. They're a firefighter, right? They're all doing the same job. They're pulling hose, they're breaching, they're, you know, defense, offense, attacks, whatever. But they're doing the same job. So why is there such a big disparity in the standard to which you can pass?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And to give an example and to preface this, I have never been the fittest, strongest, fastest anywhere ever. So I'm not what I'm about to say is not coming from someone that was, you know, an Olympic athlete or something, just a normal guy that tried to be the best version of himself as a firefighter. The building next to my last fire station, which was one that very, very, very rarely ever run a fire, was a 30-story hotel. Now, for me, on my then 168 pounds, 6 foot tall, skinny ass, had to strap 100 pounds of gear. So I had the air bottles, the hose, and the tools to do what I would need to do on the 30th floor. And it was a hotel. So there was a good chance that you'd be actually making a rescue way up there. So then you climb you climb 30, floors with 100 pounds of gear, and then you start working. So to contrast that, at 48, when I just left the fire service and I was running out of money, waiting for a sponsorship, I was preparing myself to go back in, you know, if I needed to. And so I went and did a CPAT as part of the kind of, you know, hiring thing that you did called fire teams. And at 46 years old, I did the CPAT in 7 minutes, 20 seconds. And again, I don't say that to sound like, oh, it's amazing. But just simply state the fact, 46 years old, 720 CPAT. So this is my point, is no one cares if it's old James with his fucked up knees from years of stunts, martial arts, and firefighting, or if it's an 18-year-old recruit. All they care about is, can that person make it to the top with the gear and get my child out of that burning hotel room? So to lower the standards and get the violin out because poor old James is in his 4th decade of his life is bullshit. It really is. Now, if you want to have that in a corporate setting, or like you said, in a military where maybe you're in the drone control unit where you're actually not required to do anything, I understand that. Fire prevention. But if you are on a fire engine, on a truck, on a rescue, in a battalion chief vehicle, and you're responding to an incident that could be a shooting or an explosion or a hurricane, and you're going to have to be a physically active member of that team,
absolutely,
then you should be held to the same standard. Period. Point blank. That's my opinion.
I totally agree. Right. Like you'll never, it's something that me and some of the folks I do research with, you know, Jake and I talk about this a lot. You know, nobody cares, right? You know, it's a great Cam Hanes saying, right? No one cares, work harder, right? Like, you just have to do it. There's a standard. Yeah, I have a similar story. I did a consumption test with one of our departments in Central Texas, and I was able to crank out a little over 4 rounds on a 45-minute bottle, and squeak out like 29 minutes of air, doing a bunch of random tasks. And you know, compared to the recruits that were in that class, like, I ran circles around them, and I'm an untrained person, right? Like, and like you, I'm not phenomenal, right? Like, I'm not like this, you know, decathlete or Olympian or anything like that, right? Like, I take care of myself, and I know how to push through things, and I had a career in the military. But it's important, right? Like, you know, there is a shield, right, in the fire service, and that shield is your fitness level. That's going to carry you in terms of your health.
Well, I think the other thing that's frustrating about this conversation is the same with the work week. Like, there are literally no downsides, because even as we mentioned, the financial element, the money is there. Now you're becoming a more fiscally sound organization. The only challenge is having the courage to actually do it. step up, advocate for it.
Yep.
But it's the same with fitness standards, which I think will go hand in hand. You create an environment that allows these people to thrive. Now is the perfect time to then put fitness standards in. But not only are you asking people to perform at a higher level, not only are you doing the things that are needed to minimize the chance of injury, for example, but also you're forging longevity and retirement. So you're extending their lifespan. So there is no downside unless, as one of my guests said, and I think it was such a beautiful, beautifully put, unless you're scared of getting tired. And if you're scared of getting tired, then you shouldn't be a firefighter in the first place. Because that's all fitness is just being uncomfortable, being hot, sweaty, tired, muscles burning for a short amount of time, 3-4 times a week. That's it. So we've got to get back to putting our big boy pants on and saying, look, no one's saying that you need to be fit. If you want to be a plumber or an accountant, then you do you. But if you want to join this profession, then you need to be fit. You need to be strong. You need to be mobile. And you need to understand what working as a team is. So I think any union or organization that's opposed fitness standards is partly responsible for the premature deaths of their people. And I find that unacceptable.
My thing with our staff is that I really encourage them, to go through flashover training, to go through a consumption drill, to do all of these things that give them an idea of what it's like to put on bunker gear, walk around, right? Like drag or rescue Randy, see what that feels like. So you have a better appreciation for kind of what we're asking our patients to do and what we're clearing them for. Because, when you've done it yourself, you have a better appreciation of like why, strength and why aerobic capacity is so important, right? The only difference between, me and that group of recruits on that, on that consumption testing field was that like I knew my VO2 was good, and I know just because of years in the military and some of the sports that I've participated in, like I know how to tap into that dark space, right? Like I can get uncomfortable. I'm okay with getting tired.
Well, when you reframed it that way, it really made me think, because if you've got a person on your crew that is afraid of being tired, then what does that mean when the shit hits the fan in a fire?
Yeah.
What does that mean if you hear gunfire? And I'm not talking about running towards a gunman, but you've been told it's a warm zone now, PD have them cornered, and you're going to go in and start dragging people out. We have to kind of ask ourselves, like, it's uncomfortable going to the gym. It's uncomfortable getting tired. Sometimes you do even tweak things or whatever. But if that scares you, if that, in your mind is something that you will shy away from, how far have you come from that excited young fire recruit that, was chomping at the bit to do these exercises? So it's not about shaming people. It's not about, they need to be thrown out today. It's the opposite. Like these people have strayed from where they should be. There's two options. Let's help them get and give them the tools back to where they need to be, which will allow them to perform, allow them to retire healthily. Or have you got to the point where in your heart of hearts, you don't want to do that anymore? Okay, that's great. Transition to a different department in the fire service that doesn't involve you being on the front line.
Man, I'm so happy you said that, right? Because that's like our big thing whenever we talk to, unions ahead of time or organizations ahead of time. We talk about like, hey, we're not here to be the boogeyman and take your job, right? Like we're here to help you get back on the path to wellness, right? Because our goal is that number one, you can retire on your own terms, right? You're not retiring because you can't do the job anymore. You're retiring because you've decided like, hey, I want to retire. This is me saying I want to retire. And then the number two and most important thing probably is that after you retire, like you can give back time to your loved ones, and you can drain that retirement that you've been putting into for your entire career. Right. And so I think what you're talking about is, like these, this isn't shaming, right? Like it's the same thing with us. Like we're not coming in here and talking to you about how your body fat impacts your VO2 and how your CPET's risky and you've got all these cardiovascular problems. Like we're trying to guide you and get you the right people so that you can take ownership of those things. One of my favorite sayings is like, we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We follow the level of our training. And it's the truth, right? And it applies towards your mental health, your physical health, and your medical health, right? Like if you're not taking care of those pillars, you're not taking care of those things because you're not, training yourself, by taking care of yourself, eating right, getting good sleep, practicing whatever it is you need to practice for your spiritual needs, then you're going to have problems, right? And they start to stack up. And when you have those different shields in place, they allow you to kind of become a little bit more resilient. And then, like you discussed, retire on your own terms, and then drain that bucket.
One more area before we kind of close out and let
Yeah.
everyone know where they can find you. Where I'm very excited as this revolution begins in Florida and they're moving to this healthy work week, and now these vacant spots are being filled by the right kind of people.
Yeah.
The next conversation is not only fitness standards, is also performance. And when I talk to your community, SFSO, et cetera, when you have strength and conditioning coaches and nutritionists and sports psychologists, they're forging performance. They're
Yep.
trying to get you to operate at a higher level. At the moment, when those same professionals come into the fire service, the conversation is ultimately, let's try and get you to die less. So there's this massive void, and
Yep.
you look at the SF program, the Thor 3 program,
War 3. Yeah.
getting war fighters back on their feet, rehabilitated, the prevention side, the performance side. I think that's the next phase. Once we get a healthy work week and a fitness standard, and the competitive recruitment where we're getting the right kind of person, and then mitigate some of the fallback from some of our more seasoned professionals. The next step, I think, which is really exciting, is in how can we use sports science to then advance the firefighter to be able to make them operate at a higher level.
Yeah, and there are so many professionals out there just chomping at the bit to get involved with this community because number one, right, like why wouldn't you want to work with first responders, right? Like they're in the profession, they're going to be potentially helping you on your worst day. And then number two, um, there's just so much potential there, right? Like how much it's an organization that's never had this type of a resource before. And there's great environments where we can show that like the proof has kind of really paid itself out, right? Like South Metro in Colorado. I always point back to Pflugerville. They've got Vanessa. She's a great, strength and conditioning specialist for that organization, and they've grown with them over the years, right? Like she's gone from when they were under 100 people to now they're over 200 people, and they're running academies now, and injury rates are falling down, and the people are healthier, and it's just by implementing these things. I think what's really important though is that whenever you have these policy implementations or these interventions that you're going to introduce, is you can't just come at organizations with a hammer right away, right? Like you have to collect data. When you collect that data, right, in terms of your fitness benchmarks or your health benchmarks, then you need to set a new goal, right? Like, okay, this is the average. Let's bump the average up to this. And then you just keep moving it until you reach a stopping point, right? And then you normalize that. And then when you normalize that, that's where you really start to see the big benefit, probably the biggest in terms of like cost reduction when you look back retrospectively from a risk management side.
Absolutely. Well, I want to throw some quick closing questions at you before I let you go.
Yeah.
The first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? I'm sure Tribe is one of them.
Yeah.
It can
Tribe
be related to our conversation today or completely unrelated.
Yeah, so Tribe is definitely one of my favorite books. We have it. It's funny, we have it in our Dallas clinic, and I forgot that I like one of our design people asked me like, "Hey, what's the books that you would recommend?" Tribe, The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. I really enjoy The Daily Stoic. I've been reading it for 6, 8, 9 years. No, 8 years. So The Daily Stoic is a great book. And then trying to think, like if you're an organizational leader, it's kind of one of those basic ones, but Good to Great. I really love that book. I reread it again recently when I took over as a CEO of the company. Good to Great was another book that I think is really powerful for organizational leaders.
Fantastic. What about films and documentaries?
Oh man, I love trash movies. I'm a I am I'm a science fiction and fantasy guy. I kind of grew up in terms of that like escapism. So I don't have any good recommendations in terms of or not but films and documentaries. I did enjoy um, the Pacific and oh man, the big Tom Hanks documentary on World War II.
Documentary, you said?
It was a story. It was about the
Saving
101st.
Private Ryan or the
No,
Band of
not
Brothers?
Band of Brothers. Yeah, Band
Yeah.
of Brothers. I've always enjoyed that. That holds a special place in my heart because of the connection to the military and you know unit cohesion and like the trials of war. So yeah.
I worked with Captain Dale Dye when I was a stuntman, and
Did you
so I had him
really?
on a couple of times. And then
Yeah.
Shane, who played the medic in Band of Brothers, he was on the show too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, great series. I really enjoyed that one.
Absolutely. All right. Well, the next question, is there a person you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
We already had Alan on there, so I was going to say Alan. Alan Chabarro is a longtime friend. Tim Sendelbach, probably. Tim Sendelbach's a chief out here, and Tim Sendelbach or Nick Perkins, one of those two guys. They are both, quietly and not so quietly sometimes, really pushing for change and taking care of their people, and sometimes fighting against the community, which is bonkers to me. To extend service like that, that is probably the craziest fight that I've ever heard a leader have to do, is to fight a community that they are serving for resources, which, yeah, I don't know. But those two fellas are exceptional leaders with a vision that is very firefighter centric and firefighter health centric. And they're just amazing human beings.
Brilliant. I appreciate that. All right. Well, the last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you and the company, what do you do to decompress?
Oh man, what do I do to decompress? I do a lot of jujitsu, so I like choking people and bending limbs the way they're not supposed to bend. It's always been a fun hobby for the past 5.5 years. I'll also climb. I haven't done much of that lately though, just because work has been really busy, and it takes you have to take a whole day or two off to go do that. But those are the two probably favorite things to decompress. Other than obviously being with my family, but I've got toddlers at home, so that's hard to decompress when you've got toddlers running around.
Absolutely. I was doing murder yoga this morning. That's my new favorite pastime too.
Oh man, yeah, though it's my favorite. Yeah, I've unfortunately, because it's been so busy here this week, no practice in this week. So I'm hoping to try and get in tomorrow.
Brilliant. All right. Well, for people listening, where can they find Frontline Mobile Health? And if you want to just again give an overview of what you offer, and then we'll talk about where we can find you specifically as well.
Yeah, so Frontline Mobile Health is a specialty occupational health clinic, and I say specialty because we just deal with public safety. So fire and police, large majority of our customers are fire. We're at frontlinemobilehealth.com. That's all one word. We offer annual new hire, fit for duty, and medical and psych screening. And we've really grown by word of mouth, just fire chief to fire chief. We've started doing shows here recently. We'll be at FRI. So if you're going to be out at FRI, we're going to have a very large booth out. And we're in 12 states, big presence in Texas, Colorado, and Georgia, but we're expanding into other locations as well.
Even though we just closed out, I got one more question because you said psych screening. As I've progressed through this 9 years and learned from all these experts, and I reflect back to the psych tests I had to do 4 times to 4 different departments, I discovered that the one I did, which was the multiple choice, the hundreds and hundreds
350 questions, the MPSS probably. Yeah, the MSPSS.
Yeah, well, it was the MMPI. So the psychiatry world basically educated me that was never meant to be used as a standalone test to determine if someone was going to be a first responder or not. So which screening do you use and why?
So I'd have to defer to Rebecca because she kind of runs lead on that. She's our lead psychologist, but that's only one aspect of four different tests that we do, to include receiving background packets from the hiring committee, and a relatively lengthy interview once we get the results back in. So it's not a one-dimensional test. The MMPI should not be used as a single source screening. And then sometimes, over-reporting and under-reporting occurs, as on some of these testing, so that can kind of skew results. And that's why it really should be evaluated by a forensic psychologist, which is who we staff on our teams. We use forensic psychologists. We don't just, not that a psychologist isn't a bad person, but forensic psychologists are specifically trained to do this type of work. And Rebecca has a pretty extensive background in that.
Brilliant. Well, one last thing for you specifically, if people want to reach out to you, where are the best places online or social media?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. You can just look up Michael Connor on LinkedIn, and you'll see that I'm there on Frontline. I keep my Facebook and my Instagram pretty private because that's typically my family. But you can always find me on LinkedIn, and I'm always posting stuff about some of the research that we're doing, some of the shows that we're at, and that kind of stuff.
Beautiful. Well, I want to say thank you again to Trevor, but also to you. I mean, again, coming from the background that you have and the medical element of the military, and then transitioning out into helping our community, I think it's phenomenal. And it sounds like, all these elements that you've talked about, from the types of blood screening that you do to the psych evaluations, it's one of those organizations that people definitely need to look into. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Hey, it was a pleasure being here. Thank you so much for having me, James.